Quick, quick question to anybody that is attending today. Would you please inform me of which screen that you are seeing on your side, if any? I'm just looking to troubleshoot potential technical issues. Hi, Kelsey. Kelsey, can you please inform me what screen that you're seeing? If you're seeing like the a single screen or should be my shared screen. Hello, Dr. Brand.
Hey there. Well, I could see looks like your PowerPoint slideshow, but it's not in theater mode. It's in kind of slide mode, it looks like.
Meaning that you can see the next slide.
Yep, you see the next slide.
So this is a great, see, this is exactly what I was hoping to avoid. So I'm going to see if I can do an item. I'm going to end this show. I'm going to stop share for just one moment and hopefully have this squared away within 5 minutes.
Good. Yeah, we got a few minutes here, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Well, let's see. We got a couple of veterans on here while we're getting going. Let's see. Yeah. Well, Nor, you're a veteran, or are you just married to a veteran? Well, Nora's probably all right. And then we got Frida on there. She's got a son in the service. I know that. Who else? Anybody else veteran? Are you a veteran or are you just married to one?
Me?
You.
I was married to one and I was a civilian
for
the Army.
Yeah, so you were kind of one. Yeah, you were one. The Army, go Army.
The Army. I was a customs inspector.
Rita, is it your son or your husband too?
My husband.
One son.
My husband.
No, I'm talking to Frida.
Oh,
she's got some.
Her husband.
Got some family. I think she's got a boy in the Army.
My oldest son is active duty. My second oldest is a veteran. My dad was Air Force. We have a whole family of military.
All right. It's good to hear. Is that Cheryl Lowry that I know? I ask that every time and I never get an answer. So I guess
never
it's
do.
probably not. Huh?
Never do get an answer.
I never get an answer from that Cheryl Lowry. Not today either. So anyway. Vicki, how are you? Dr. White? All right. So what do you think, Dr. Brandt? You about ready?
I think I'm about ready.
All right.
We're gonna
we'll give it 2 more minutes. I think there's a few more people signing on, so we'll give it a few more minutes, then we'll get going.
Right.
So it looks like it's 38 degrees outside. Kind of cold.
Getting cold fast.
It is. It's getting cold fast. All right.
All right. Now, so I think I changed things up such that You were not
Huh?
seeing my next slide. Is that the case? Are you just seeing a single slide?
See, it looks like your introductory slide, understanding
okay.
neuroscience. All right, I think that's
All
it.
right. Wow. Incredible.
That's good.
It does look good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You might want to teach a class on that.
Yeah, we'll make that the next seminar. How about that?
Right.
We'll have that on standby just in case somebody doesn't show Dr. Brand. I'll get something ready. We'll be ready for last minute.
How to prepare meaningful slides in your substance abuse, in your patient education.
There's a level of creativity with this stuff.
Right. All right, looks like it's 2:00, so we'll get going. Welcome to CD Seminars. This is brought to you by a workforce development grant from the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. Welcome. We're glad to have you on this this Veterans Day. We got several veterans in the audience, and we have a veteran who's going to present for us today, Dr. Brent Whisker, who I think is Special Forces capable. So that's good to have. So, just a bit about Dr. Whisker's got his undergraduate degree in chemistry. He went on to get his PhD from the Oklahoma Center for Neuroscience. So he has a PhD in neuroscience, and also kind of a different combination, but he has his master's in social work, got his master's from OU. So he is in a very good position to talk to us about understanding the neuroscience and neurology of addiction. So he's going to do that, and I'm not going to take up any more of his time. So thank you for being here, Dr. Whisker. Look forward to the presentation.
Thank you very much. And it's always great to be invited. And I appreciate you being here and hope that this time that we have together today will be a good investment of your time. I also like to say thank you so much for those that are in the audience today that are veterans. I know it's not necessarily easy for many people today with all the challenges that we have in the greater environment that you're faced with. And so as we move through our Veterans Day presentation, I also wanted to highlight just a few things. So if I make any great joke, those are original material. However, if I express any form of opinion, that's not necessarily representative of the OU Health Sciences Center. And today, so we're going to understand how reward and motivation processes are literally hijacked by substances of abuse during the process of addiction. And we're also going to describe describe both beneficial and detrimental components of cannabis on the brain. And finally, we're going to review the latest neuroscientific evidence that links psychosis and addiction. I have several fabulous references that I use as the primary sources, although there are other reference materials here, and I can point that out. And any reference material, I have the PDFs of anything here. So if you'd like to reach out for a reference that might be of interest to you, just reach out and I will share that with you. So the primary reference that I'm going to use is by Dr. Nora Valkow, and she's the director of drug addiction at the National Institute of Health. So she is quite an incredible resource. And I have others that I won't stumble through the names, but you can see there in my slideshow presentation. And so I thought since today is Veterans Day, I did want to just provide a little bit of an overarching theme, if you will, of today's presentation, and try to use that as a backdrop of that might make understanding the neuroscience of addiction and the potential development of psychosis basically a little bit more relevant or easier to understand. So, and on today, Veterans Day, this is on this day on November 11th, 1918, it was Armistice Day, and that's when Germany surrendered during World War I. And so we are quite a few years off, 104 years. It's almost unbelievable. And many of you probably may even have great grandparents or family members that may have been even in World War I and likely World War II as well. And on June 6th, this is a picture of on June 6th in 1944, 156,000 American, British, and Canadian troops, they stormed the beach of Normandy in one of the actually the largest naval assault in modern history. And so I just wanted to in a sense, use another great backdrop, or from my perspective, a great backdrop. Has anybody here seen the movie Saving Private Ryan? A little thumbs up by your on your if you can on your little Zoom, give me a thumbs up if you've seen the movie Saving Private Ryan. Okay, I see
I saw it. I don't know how to do the thumbs up.
Okay, no worries. So all right, we have a couple here. Well, that's great. So since this movie is approximately 50 years after the assault on the beaches of Normandy, and this movie is 24 years old now, so I would just assume some of you might not have seen it. But so I'm just going to, since it's 24 years old, I didn't figure that I'd give a spoiler alert for any of you. So I just wanted to bring highlight to some of the really cool aspects of this movie that might be again able to be used as a backdrop or overarching theme. So in the movie Saving Private Ryan, this was produced by Steven Spielberg. So he presents the movie, the very first of the movie. General Marshall gave this order, and he gave this order to save a single private. And this single private, Private Ryan, he had lost 3 of his brothers, although he didn't know it at the time. He had lost 3 of his brothers the same day, and so his mother would have received notification that she had lost all of her children in World War II had General Marshall not acted. So General Marshall gave an order to save Private Ryan, even though the general knew that this would likely cause some people to lose their lives with this mission alone. But General Marshall perceived that this intent in this horrific world war, that this intent to literally save a single person from a wartime perspective of a low-ranking, regular, everyday person from the farmlands of America, they attempted to save this one person. So Captain Miller, played by Tom Hanks, was commissioned to take a squad of soldiers to find this paratrooper who had been misdropped, if you will. He had been dropped out of the location of which his command thought he would be dropped. And so Captain Miller and his small squad of soldiers begins to transverse Germany looking for Private Ryan. And as they go throughout the countryside of Germany, they're able to see just both the significant challenges that we face as human beings, some of the best of who we can be as people, and some of the worst of who we can be as people. And so not only did they see this, but they also saw, in many cases, the Captain Miller during this time, he basically joined the other Allied forces where needed to, in order to help them fight in whatever battles that they were fighting at the time, en route to save Private Ryan, of whom they couldn't, of whom they hadn't found at that time. So they eventually find this paratrooper, and this paratrooper, James Ryan, is on a bridge, and this bridge is the last holdout of basically the last bridge of which the Germans can use to repel the Allied forces' assault. And so maintaining this bridge was an absolutely critical strategic point. So Captain Miller, he finds Private Ryan, and he tries to save Private Ryan and basically get him off that bridge. And like like almost any young adult that you'll ever meet, sometimes they're a little bit hard of hearing. And so Private Ryan said, you know what, I know you have these orders, and I'm sorry that my brothers have passed, but I'm going to fight with the brothers that I have here. So Captain Miller says, well, this is a unique circumstance, and he joins Private Ryan and the new company of which Private Ryan is now attached to save this bridge. Unfortunately, at least in this movie, Captain Miller was shot and critically wounded, and then at the last moment, the Allies, in a sense, saved the day, if you will. The Air Force came in and helped repel the German forces, and they were able to save the bridge and simultaneously save Private Ryan. But Captain Miller's last words to Private Ryan, was to earn the sacrifices that they had made for him. So the young paratrooper took this job this command very seriously, and he went back to the United States. And he went on to live a good life and had a family and had children and grandchildren. And matter of fact, they had grandchildren such that they never would know the significant horrors that the World War II veterans that they had to endure in order for them to have the life of which there's really not much pain and suffering of which was experienced for the most Americans at that time and many people in the world. So I wanted to use that story as a little bit of a backdrop to show how our brains can be affected. And I'm just going to use a couple little items from this story, Private Ryan's hero journey story, to talk about how some traumas and some changes of our brain can occur during addiction. And then for some, how that can actually lead to psychosis. So that's a little bit of a backdrop. So for objective one, I'm just going to go into understanding how the reward and motivation process are hijacked by substances of abuse during the addiction process. So one of the first things I would like to bring attention to is in your brainstem area, and you can see here that I have highlighted in blue these little Rafe nuclei, and this Rafe nuclei, that's primarily the part of your brain that produces serotonin, and serotonin is used to help you identify where you are at in your social world. And for instance, whenever I say Private Ryan versus Captain Miller, where private is considered a low rank and captain is a mid-level, a command-oriented rank, and so for those, so there might be an increased serotonin associated with, let's say, a person that might be promoted. And so the next area that I'd like to highlight is an area called your midbrain. And this midbrain area is the point zero of your threat response system. So if you've ever had a panic attack or know somebody who has, this area was associated with that panic response. Or if you're suddenly startled and you, in a sense, flinch without even looking without even thinking about flinching, this is the area that could be activated, the level of your brain that can be activated during that stress response. I'd like to also bring attention to a couple areas of your brain, specifically the hippocampus. So I mentioned earlier how how Captain Miller, he had to go from point to point to point to try to save Private Ryan, and your hippocampus is distinctly associated with being able to orientate yourself in the world. And not only that, but remember where important things are at in the world. So it's very important with tagging and making those short-term and long-term memories. The amygdala, which you may be able to see just right by the hippocampus, that's that area of your brain that can activate a fear response. And it's not just fear, it's associated with many of our emotional and our emotions and our emotional processing. But that amygdala, whenever it's activated, can activate that midbrain area that I told you about. It's actually a specific area called your para-aqueductal gray, and it can induce that stress response. Now, when a stress response occurs, the amygdala and the hippocampus, it can activate this little area called the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus can activate the pituitary gland to reduce a substance that results in the cortisol release and norepinephrine being released. So it can put you in a stressed response. Just by that area, and this is basically, I just wanted to highlight just a couple other components of your brain that become very important during the addiction process, and collectively, or if you piece together your striatum from the caudate nucleus to putamen nucleus accumbens, this area of your brain helps connect certain areas of your brain, but it's also directly responsible or distinctly associated with your ability to move well, for movement and behaviors. So things that you're able to do without even thinking about, this area of your brain is associated with that capacity in regards to movement. And I didn't specify here, but also your cerebellum is associated with your ability to move and have fluid movement and remember how to move in response to whatever action, or in order to induce whatever action that you would like without even having to think about it much. Moving forward from this area, this is an area called your anterior cingulate cortex. And this anterior cingulate cortex there's an anterior side, and then of course the posterior side. That posterior cingulate cortex can help you determine, in a sense, how you feel. So it can help help associate and identify, and it works with other areas in your cortex to help you determine how you feel about something. And the anterior cingulate cortex, this is an incredible area that's associated with your ability to keep focus on things. So I know right now we have about 44 minutes left, hopefully around 39 minutes or less of presentation. And so your ability to focus, assuming you even intend to focus on said presentation, this anterior cingulate cortex is directly related with your capacity to do just that. And I didn't highlight it much here on the slide, but I just wanted to point out just to the left side on your screen of that anterior cortex, cingulate cortex, that as an area called your prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal cortex, there are obviously several areas of your prefrontal cortex, but that gives you your amazing ability to be able to strategize things, to be able to think about how you feel about certain things. And this area of your brain is also distinctly associated with you determining, where do I want to go in life, or where do I want to go today? What do I want to do? Your ability to think about that is directly associated with the capacity of your prefrontal cortex. So whenever I just said, think about what you want in life, or what do you want to move towards in life? And whenever I mentioned the movie Saving Private Ryan, Captain Miller had this purpose. He had this purpose, that his sole purpose that he had given to him by General Marshall was to find this person. And so Captain Miller to save Private Ryan. So Captain Miller and his squad went about trying to find Captain Miller and, Private Ryan. And as they were traversing the countryside, there were times whenever they did not get any information at all, whenever they found, let's say, new troops. And they're like, oh man, where we went Unfortunately, we thought we were going to go someplace, and this place was unsuccessful. In other places, they were able to link up with people who knew Private Ryan, and they knew that they were closer to finding Private Ryan. So there's two areas of your brain that are distinctly associated with your reward pathways, your your VTA, ventral tegmental area, and your nucleus accumbens. And these areas of your brain are dopamine rich areas of your brain. It's distinctly associated with your reward pathways. The other thing that I'd like to find out is, although I said it's associated with your reward pathway, for instance, hey, I just got the answer to this test correct. Yay. That positive feeling, that can release dopamine. Or, hey, I just received an A on this major term paper, or I just received an A on this major, for this course that gets me closer to a degree of which I'm trying to earn. These rewards can be a very basically they produce, and they are a part of the they produce dopamine as a part of your natural reward pathway. And as a basically as the antithesis of that, literally the inverse of that is, whenever you're expecting to receive a reward and don't get it, then you can result in a loss of dopamine. I don't know if anybody of you here has ever, like, for instance, you might have been looking forward to going out and seeing a great movie, or perhaps going to a presentation and you thought, man, this is going to be the best presentation ever. And then you get there and you're like, wow, Dr. Whisker definitely under-delivered. I am upset. And so you can have a loss of dopamine. Now, that part was supposed to be a little bit of humor there. So anyway, so the point is whenever you're expecting something but don't get it, then that reward pathway almost becomes a pathway of punishment, or a perceived pathway of punishment, because you wanted something and did not get it. So just moving a little bit forward here, I also wanted to highlight just a few other areas and just really bringing focus on how these areas in blue that you see here, these are the dopamine rich areas. How, if you recall, I mentioned how your movement was in the striatal area here. This is heavily enriched with dopamine. How your prefrontal cortex is associated with giving you the strategic capacity to go to determine whether you want to move from one place or another. So the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens are directly responsible for the levels of dopamine that may be released or not released in areas of the brain associated with your perspective, with your perception, whether you're moving in the right direction in life or not. All right. So from our natural reward pathway, this results in changes in our dendritic morphology. That means literally the cells of your brain, the nerves of your brain, they respond. And whenever they respond, or whenever they are activated over and over again, it does result in this long-term potentiation. Some of these neural pathways might be considered excitatory. Some might be considered inhibitory. And then many of these are associated with what we call your hedonic effect, or things that might be resulting in pleasure. For instance, your endocannabinoid system, of which we'll talk about a little bit later. For example, that of which would be activated by the use of marijuana. Serotonin, for instance, whenever you whether you prescribe or associated with the prescription of a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor for those that might be challenged with anxiety and or depression. Or noradrenergic systems, the opioid systems. So these are systems that are associated with your hedonic effect. And I also wanted to highlight that even whenever we say excitatory, I wanted to just keep in mind that just because a neuron is excitatory, that might be an excited switch that turns something off. So for example, it could be an action, just like if you're turning on or turning off a light. It literally depends on whether the light is on or off already, whether that would be considered an excitatory or inhibitory action. So neurons are these neural systems. They can have an excitatory action that could appear to be depressive, or an inhibitory action that appears to be active in some other domain of the brain. So I just wanted to highlight again how this repeated dopaminergic stimulation can result in long-term potentiation of these circuitries. So I've just been talking about neurotransmitters, things that are turned off in one way, or as if it's just a single switch. But what I wanted to highlight is that our brain typically works in most cases through a network. So it's not just one system, it is systems working together. And so as you're here today, right now, you might, let's say if you're in your office, you might have like three, maybe your email, or you might be getting text message, etc. Or you might just be listening to this with no other things that you have to do at all. So, and part of your brain that works whenever you are just, in a sense, sitting down like you are, not necessarily having to be associated with any other task, that's called your default mode network. And this default mode network, I highlighted here the areas of which, excuse me. This default mode network is this, again, just associated with when you are at rest. But when you're at rest, one of the cool things about being at rest, it gives you the opportunity to, in a sense, daydream. So as you take in some information, assuming it's not task-oriented requirements that then start using other areas of your brain for movement, for instance, task-directed movement, one of the things that can occur during your daydreaming time period or your resting period is you can review information that is coming into the world, and you can look at how that information is associated with what you think you already know. And you can then determine, based on current information, how does this affect some decision or belief system that you might have to make. So I just wanted to highlight this default mode network as we move forward in the presentation. Okay, so excuse me, we have gone through the first component of the presentation today, and I'd like to bring into the understanding the neuroscience of neurological alterations of addiction. So we're going to just define drug addiction, although I know everybody here works with those that might be challenged with substance use of some form, but addiction is a chronic relapsing disease of the brain triggered by repeated exposure to drugs in those who are vulnerable because of genetics and developmental or adverse social exposures. And I wanted to highlight that this is what is not said is that this drug addiction is the result of a person just not being a good person, or just a person who just wants to waste their life for whatever reason. What this title represents is that this is some of our brains are more vulnerable to addiction and the addiction processes, and that those that are addicted are, for the most part, just like us, except they might have some either genetic differences that we have, or they've had some form of adverse social exposures, which has altered the course or the development of their neurocircuitry. And so just throwing in here, I know you're very familiar with DSM-5, but just wanted to highlight, if you meet 6 or 7 of these criteria, now is a great time to call the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and make an appointment. So that is what my one sales pitch of the presentation today. Okay. And some drugs of addiction, we're just going to focus on just a few today, but I'd like to highlight alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, hallucinogens, inhalants, opioids, sedatives, hypnotics, anxiolytics, stimulants, and other known or unknown substances. And I brought up this slide not because it's super wordy and almost might be hard to see on your side, but what I wanted to highlight, that whether it's opioids, alcohol, nicotine, stimulants, cannabis, look at every one of these increase this dopamine. So every drug of addiction plays a role in increasing dopamine in areas of the brain that's associated with the addiction process. And substance use and the process. So we're just going to highlight just a few points that I mentioned the brain reward system earlier, and this is directly involved in the reinforcement of behaviors and the production of memories. So one of the things that drugs will do, for instance, we'll just take alcohol as an example, is as let's say if you're having a very positive experience, you're at a party, and then you're consuming alcohol, it can make the experience that you have and the dopamine response that you have that could be associated with just having a positive social interaction. It can significantly increase the amount of dopamine, so that you then associate party with alcohol. Or it could be football, basketball, etc. It could be a number of different things that can, in a sense, be incorporated into that pleasure reward, and then where your brain perceives that alcohol or some other substances is the reason of which that behavior or that activity was rewarded. So again, this is a direct activation of the brain reward system, but not through adaptive behaviors. So adaptive behaviors such as, I've worked hard for a grade, I've studied, I took the test, I made a good grade, and congratulations, I got an A. That's not it at all. It is, hey, I drank this drink, and now I feel as good as if I had done hard work and received an A or some other reward that I wanted. And finally, these substances produce such an intense activation of the reward system that unfortunately normal activities may be neglected. And sometimes these this can be as a result of, if you recall, that whenever we have a reward, and whether it's making a good grade or receiving a paycheck or winning, or perhaps winning the lottery, etc., some of these things can of course activate that dopamine system. But whenever you start comparing how you feel about things, for instance, it's just a comparison that your brain does. The unfortunate thing is that the substance use, since it uses the reward system as if the reward system was a positive indicator of what one should do, it then looks at what normally should produce a positive reward, such as studying or working hard for a paycheck, and it decreases the perceived reward associated with that. And then your brain says, you know what, I'm just going to focus on things that give me this reward, because that must be what's important in my life. And so these repeated dopaminergic stimulation occurs during substance use, and it activates the same reward pathway, but it results in long-term potentiation that is associated not with good things that are, for instance, your typical reward based on your natural reward system, such as working, hunting, planting, etc., things that are designed to give you a natural reward, such as food, water, or some other form of resource, or some other form of positive romantic engagement. It does not do that. Instead, it reinforces the behaviors associated with the acquisition of the substance. And thus your brain takes a process that is supposed to be a survival-based process, resulting in the acquisition of adaptive behavior, things that you should be doing, studying, working hard, being kind to others, being where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there. Instead, it says, hey, the substance of this substance that I can take is actually what I need to be doing, because my brain tells me I need to do that in order to survive, because that is exactly the mechanisms that are activated during the substance use. So the end result is this long-term potentiation and acquisition of maladaptive behavior. And highlighting again, decreased motivation for non-drug related actions. So again, this is how a person can, through, not because they're choosing to do bad in life or to be a bad person, it's their brain believes that the positive steps towards the use of substances is the correct steps that it should make. So in summary, the substance of addiction hijack the brain's natural reward system and decrease motivation of non-drug related actions. And that stress sensitivity is increased. And unfortunately, that long-term potentiation, it can persist for months or years. So even if a person stops drinking, smoking, or taking whatever substance, their brain, particularly when stressed or placed under stress-like conditions, will try to survive, and they will go to the thing that it is confident that it can quickly release that survival or reward, which it sees as equal, and they can return to substances of misuse. So moving to objective 2, we're just going to describe both beneficial and detrimental components of cannabis on the brain. So we're not going to spend we are going to spend time with this, but collectively, I am aware of the time that we have left, and so this will be a relatively limited engagement for objective 2. So just highlighting. Matter of fact, I'm going to stop share real quick. Apologize. And I'm going to switch over here and just share real quick. I'm having just a slight technical issue on my side. Okay. I'm almost done. Thank you for your patience. Okay. Oops. Let me share the right screen. That's helpful. Okay. All right. So sharing this screen again. So there are, in regards to the cannabinoid system, there are 2 major subdivisions of the cannabinoid system. One, the CB1 system, is found mostly in the brain, and the CB2 is primarily associated with the body. The cool thing, and we're going to be focusing on the cannabinoid 1 subgroup today, but the cannabinoid 2, it is truly amazing how this system is responsible for the maintenance of your immune response. But focusing on the neurobiology of marijuana. And so we're just going to briefly look at some concentrations of the CBD receptors, particularly in your brain. What I wanted to highlight, if you recall, whenever we're talking about this reward pathway, that ventral tegmental area and that nucleus accumbens, well, guess what? That's the area that's also associated with the cannabinoid, where there are a lot of receptors involved. Also, that hippocampus, which gives you the ability to helps give you the ability to transverse from one location to another, and then remembering where you need to be and when you need to be there. This part of your brain, the hippocampus, is also heavily there's heavy cannabinoid receptors in that area. Same thing with the areas of your thalamus, your movement centers, your anterior cingulate cortex, and also in your prefrontal cortex and other areas of your movement and sensation. These are all heavily, there are a lot of cannabinoid receptors located in these areas. I'm not necessarily going to read through this. I just wanted to highlight that the cannabinoids are associated with signaling. So whenever we assume, let's say we're smoking, whether it's CBD or anandamide or THC, these can activate this cannabinoid receptor signaling. And I just wanted to highlight for the active component of one of the active components of marijuana, THC, the brain identifies it as its endogenous anandamide. And so it activates the same system, and the brain thinks or the brain perceives that it is a part of its endogenous system. One of the things that is unique about the cannabinoid system is there's actually these lipids that are released. So it's a little bit different from the traditional neurotransmitter releases. But once the cannabinoid receptor is activated, these cannabinoids are released from the membrane of the receptor and then activate on that postsynaptic receptor. Probably a little bit more information that you're wanting, but it's a super cool and unique part of that. So most of us are aware of cannabis from those who enjoy smoking weed, or for those that might smoke weed or have in the past. What I wanted to highlight is that, yes, we have a number of names for this, but in comparison to when we were, let's say, if we went back to the 1980s or even the 1960s, today there is a greater amount of social acceptance of the use of cannabis. Multiple states across the nation have basically stated that, yes, they have now legalized marijuana. Many have, to include Oklahoma, with some limitations, of course. But the point is that now we have over half of our population that does not believe that smoking marijuana is morally a bad thing. And so so just wanted to highlight, hey, so some people, they receive this a pleasurable sensation whenever they use marijuana. It can give them a heightened sensory perception, laughter, altered perception of time, and increased appetite. And all of these, the brain can also perceive, particularly whenever we have heightened sensory perception. It can, in a sense, we can perceive that we are at almost like a higher state of consciousness, particularly whenever THC is involved. And so that high that one receives can also be perceived as a source of meaning in one's life, particularly whenever there's not a lot of meaning found in their life elsewhere. And so marijuana, I did want to highlight some of the positive uses of marijuana. It's been used for glaucoma, loss of appetite, nausea, chronic pain, and muscle spasticity. So there are medicinal uses of marijuana. So and it's also has been used as an analgesic and a hypnotic and an anticonvulsant. However, for the developing mind, the use of marijuana might have may not necessarily have the positive medicinal effects that adults with other chronic disease or disordered states might find benefit for the use of marijuana. So today, approximately, or this was even taken several years ago, so this might even be higher today, approximately 7% of 8th graders have used marijuana, almost 20%, 15 to 20% of 10th graders, and by the 12th grade, almost a quarter, 1/5 to 1/4 of high school students have used marijuana. And so for some of the acute adverse effects of marijuana, it can be relatively like short-term memory, impaired attention, impaired coordination and balance, increased heart rate, anxiety, and paranoia. But unfortunately, this can also, particularly whenever you consume it when you're young, it can result in these long-term persistent challenges. It increases the potential for marijuana addiction. It can impair one's IQ if it's heavily used during adolescence. There is an increased risk of chronic cough and bronchitis, assuming you're smoking it. And also there's an increased use of drug and alcohol disorders for those that have to engage in smoking marijuana prior to before they're 18 years of age. There's also increased risk in people with genetic vulnerability, and we're going to quickly move through that in the last objective of our time here today and within the last 6 minutes, or excuse me, 6 to 10 minutes. So well, let's look at some of this links between psychosis and addiction. And what I wanted to highlight is that for most people, those that particularly for adults that may periodically use cannabis or smoke marijuana, whether smoke or vape, etc., for the most part, they will likely not have any challenges with psychosis or increased probability of schizophrenia. But I just wanted to highlight, well, what are some of the increased challenges with cannabis use? So increased recreational use of cannabis, it may result in the alterations in that that endocannabinoid system function, and it may dysregulate the neural networks. And those neural networks are absolutely important. And I like to highlight that bridge that we're talking about on that deep, and kind of use that as a corollary. For instance, in Saving Private Ryan, whenever they are trying to save that last bridge, in those neural nodes, if the neural node is compromised, you can have, let's say, one part of your brain being too active and another part of your brain not being active enough. And so for some people, whenever this occurs, it can give them they may perceive that they're going through a delirium or psychosis. And so this disruption of that default mode network, it can be involved in autobiographical memory issues, spontaneous thought, integration of social information. Those are the positives, but the disruption of that can be associated with schizophrenia, ADHD, conduct disorder, and depression. So increased use of cannabis in some can increase the probability that default mode network is compromised and possibly lead to greater disordered states. So research shows, using fMRI imaging, functional and structural alterations in frontal parietal, frontal limbic, frontal striatal, and cerebellar regions among adolescents and emerging adults that use cannabis. And so this is from over 9,000 fMRI studies. So definitely disrupts the healthy development of a brain for these early adults and children. So the potential impairment with frequent cannabis use in some can result in these compromises of that default mode network. And I would also like to highlight a couple animal studies that are, so rats exposed to high levels of THC show structural and functional changes in the hippocampus, that area of the brain that you need to be able to translocate from one location to another, move from one location to another, or make long-term memories, short-term memories, certainly what you would need in school. And adolescent rats show alterations in the reward systems that can also increase the self-administration of other drugs, specifically like heroin. So for many, humans, and maybe in your own clinical or community practice, you have seen that those who have worked, or excuse me, who may have taken cannabis or smoked marijuana as a child, and a lot of it, they may have increased challenges with drugs later in life, and thus be a gateway drug. So it remains to be determined whether findings reflect premorbid risk factors or the consequence of cannabis exposure. We're going to go over that here in just a few moments. And inconsistencies may be attributable to variations in cannabis potency or cannabinoid composition. So depending on particularly what type of marijuana, somebody just using marijuana smoking as an example, the type of marijuana, its chemical attributes might differ, and therefore cause different effects on one brain versus another. But what I did want to highlight is, well, let's look at some of the predisposing factors. Just because any of us, let's say if we choose to recreationally smoke marijuana, well, will that turn us into somebody who with an increased probability of psychosis or schizophrenia? So there's an AKT gene variation with psychosis. And so what I wanted to highlight there is that just a gene this is associated with that striatal area of your brain. And what we find is that increased use of cannabis directly affects the probability of psychosis for those with this AKT, gene. Difference, excuse me. Take a quick drink. So looking at some other genetic variations in COMT and variations and schizophrenic disorder. So adolescents who smoke quite a bit of marijuana as a basically as a adolescent. So this COMT, just I did not really describe what it does, but this is an enzyme that's responsible for breaking down dopamine. So by smoking, excuse me, for this genetic, so this in a sense keeps a greater amount of dopamine in the synaptic cleft whenever dopamine is released. So in a sense, it enhances the amount of dopamine that is available. And so for those with this genetic variation of this COMT enzyme, there is an increased probability of schizophrenia if they, by the age of 26, if they utilize marijuana, if they smoke marijuana as an adolescent. So that is a relatively quick overview of psychosis as it's related to the addiction pathway, but just wanted to highlight again THC and psychosis. So that chronic cannabis use increases the risk of developing psychosis. There's a 5-time higher potential if you use it daily. There's acute cannabis exposure, and that can temporarily increase the psychotomimetic, always mess that one up, symptoms, and acute THC exposure shown to decrease activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and alter limbic area activity. And so collectively, these can dysregulate those neural networks, and these dysregulated neural networks can increase your probability of developing psychosis. So 8 minutes before the hour, just wanted to again highlight here, this is what we were working to understand from addiction to psychosis, how your reward system can be hijacked by substances of abuse, substances of abuse. How it can describe both beneficial and detrimental components of cannabis on the brain. We did go through that. And then finally, we looked at some of the neuroscientific evidence that links psychosis and addiction together. And so I just wanted to open up to any questions that you might have. And so please, I'd like to open the floor and see if anybody would like to have any discussion in regards to the presentation topic for today. Okay, so I'm not hearing any questions, so maybe I can ask the group some questions. Have you, over the past 5 years since they've legalized marijuana, seen any of your clients have more of a challenge with psychosis or some other substance, basically a substance use psychosis? Has anybody witnessed that in their care provision?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi,
Dolores.
This is Dolores. I am asking a question in reference to vaping. I've
Yes.
noticed I have two middle school clients
Yes.
who have become involved in vaping here lately, the past few months, and one was just suspended from school and having to go to a special program with the parent. So what would you recommend for me as a therapist to include in my type of strategy in working with the student and the parent?
So,
Hey, Dr. Brant, you want to stop sharing so we can
I would love
everybody
to.
see everybody? That'd be a good idea.
I would love to. And Dolores, I just wanted to make sure that I'm reframing your question, just to make sure that I heard it correctly, that, hey, I have a couple clients that are using vaping, they're vaping. And
Yes.
and you're now seeing them in clinic. It's becoming a behavioral issue for them, and
Yes.
you're trying to help them as young adults and their parents navigate this difficult issue that they have. Is that
Yes.
okay? And then I'm just assuming, as you speak with the child in regard, or excuse me, the adolescent in regards to vaping, that they might say, hey, I'm just using this to help relax or cool myself
Yes,
off, etc.
exactly.
So right.
Exactly.
So, and then there's also a positive component to it. It's a behavioral characteristic. For instance, the more we vape, so the more we vape and the better we feel about vaping, if you will, regardless of
Yes.
the negatives about it, it locks it into this behavior that we have, and we want to do it. And we're young adults. We like autonomy.
Yes.
And because mom or dad or the teachers don't care much for it, I just want to do whatever I have to do not to get in trouble. Is this in a sense, the perspective of your client?
Exactly. And
Yes.
the client is, I don't care if I get in trouble.
Okay. And so that, of course, it becomes, so I'm going to be able to at least describe what may be going on neurologically or from a neuroscience perspective. And so please take my advice as just framing potential. So I'm not necessarily giving therapeutic advice if I'm making
Yes.
sense here.
Okay.
So there may be a couple issues associated with this. First, children being young adults, and I'm saying children, adolescents being young adults,
Yes.
they may literally just have some other life complexities where they just want autonomy in their own life. They're going to do what they want to do. I don't care. I don't see my teachers as very smart anyway. And my parents, they're divorced or whatever. And, they're not the people anyway. They are in a sense, very, they might have some form of, disagreeableness associated with lack of agreeableness, if you will, in the general social order. So one of the things that I would like to highlight is just in a sense reinforcing their value as individuals to begin with, and saying, hey, you understand this, but what you're in a sense there for is looking out for their long term. You're there to help them for their long term behaviors that will help them in their life, and also not compromise their long term health. And so there are a number of anxiety. So I would encourage, if they claim that they're using it for anxiety, okay, the question is are there other anxiety related techniques of which they could use that would not necessarily be vape? Or let's say they have a behavioral issue associated with vaping, but their vaping so are they vaping a THC product? Is that okay? So in a sense, you might say, okay, well, let's at least take steps to reduce the THC that you're avoiding.
Okay.
Not saying we're stopping all vaping, because that's a whole nother topic, but the THC exposure, not that any of those other chemicals, I have no idea all the chemicals that they put in them, but I know they're not good. But we know that THC is a bad chemical in high concentrations, particularly for adolescent children. And so to see if you can just work on the behavioral component first, work on, or as part of the strategy, the anxiety aspect of it, because, you know, life is stressful. I don't know about you, but the most of the people that I know, they had a tough go at it associated with the COVID pandemic, and, you know, being told what to do for years and years. I don't know too many people who like that either. So point is that we can certainly see, hey, maybe there's some other behavioral stress or framework that they have that might not necessarily say you're a bad person for vaping. Instead, let's say, can we be a better person by vaping and not using THC? Can we be a better person by managing our stress in a different manner, and perhaps reduce the need to vape at all? And so not necessarily the cold turkey, this is bad, you're bad, cut it out, you know, not that technique, but a technique that in a sense recognizes their challenges, their autonomy as human beings, but tries to advocate for their long-term mental health care by reducing the THC exposure, and in a sense interjecting more of the natural reward techniques. There are a number of breathing I'm sure you probably know these even better than I do, but there are several methods in order to change one's psychology by using their physiology. One of the positive things about vaping, and here's a positive thing about vape. So this sounds contrary to what one of the positive aspects for both smoking and vaping is they're using a natural mechanism to actually put them into a state of calmness. So their breathing techniques that they're doing while they're vaping are actually natural breathing techniques that they would use to relax to begin with. So that deep inhale, slight hold, and long exhale, that naturally puts us into a state of relaxation. Unfortunately, when you add vape or cigarettes to that, you're using a natural process that results in relaxation. But instead of doing that without smoking, we do it with smoking, and then we assign the relaxation, of course, with chemical added substances that enhance that relaxation state.
That ain't gonna good.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure.
Well, that was a nice little case study you did there, Dr. Brent.
Oh, well,
we're about out of time. Any last comments or quick questions or anything for anybody?
Hello.
So, okay. Well, we again, thank you for filling in. Very informative presentation, good for everybody. And are your slides, is it okay if Kelsey makes a PDF of those?
Of course, send it out, send it up.
Folks? Okay.
More than happy to. Yes.
A lot of material in there people may want to refer back to. So
glad, and I have all the PDFs of these, National Institute of Health and other related resources that I can send away if requested.
All righty. Well, thanks again. Wish everybody have a happy and safe weekend. Try to stay warm, and we'll see you. We don't know what the presentation is going to be next week. We're still working on that, but we plan on having one. So we'll see you next Friday. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.